Video. All right. Yeah. Cool. Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm gonna turn my camera off in a second and pull up a PowerPoint. But yeah, for this one, I was gonna go through if some of y'all came, was it November last year, I think, early last year when we did one in person. But I'm gonna just give kind of a decent overview on retirement prep. I'll talk about a lot of the stuff that I'll hit, like if I'm meeting with somebody one-on-one, let's say mid 50s, 60 years old, getting ready for retirement in a few years. Just kind of high level, hit some of the things that, a lot of people forget about, things to think about. It won't leave you, ready to do it all yourself necessarily, but hopefully, if anything, it might shed some light on some things that some people miss. And I'm open during this or after or anytime for questions, clarifications, anything. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint. It's one that we've used for, actually, as a company, we do some consulting with down in North Carolina. So I'll skip some slides that pertain to that company, but to keep it simple, rather than having to adjust it, resubmit it, it's a whole compliance thing. I'm just going to stick to that one and skip what doesn't apply to you guys. But let me get that pulled up 1 second here. And I'm going to turn video off as well. I don't know if that'll keep it up or not. All right. Let me just adjust my screen. And yeah, in general, if you want to, Christina, if anybody, feel free, guys, to jump in with a question. Maybe just jump in with the chat. And if you see anything, Christina, feel free to just interrupt me. I'll just go off on various points the whole time. So feel free to jump in if anyone has a question while we're going through. And I'm expecting we'll have some time at the end. This won't take a ton of time to go through. So feel free to ask during if you want to, or at the end, I think we'll have some time. But yeah, so overall, retirement planning, the main thing I wanted to hit on this presentation is, the high points, and some of this stuff will apply to the younger crowd too. I don't know the ages of everybody in here, so this is not all information for the 60-year-olds, for example. I'll touch on some things that can apply to everybody, but retirement in general, since that's the focus of what we're talking about, one of the big things there, what are your different sources of income going to be? How much do you need to spend? Obviously, a lot of this is driven by the investments that you do with all these different monies. And then towards the end, I'll hit on just briefly, just the topics of insurance, taxes, a little bit of estate planning. Those last two, obviously, I'm not a CPA. I'm also not a lawyer, so we won't go into a ton of detail, but some of that stuff does cross over into the financial side. So one thing that I've seen, and this is personal, and again, we'll go through slides, but a lot of folks, as they get closer to retirement, in general, it can be hard to wrap your head around it, think, am I ready? Am I not ready? I'm sure this is some old statistic, but idea just being that you're not alone if you're feeling like, hey, it's hard to really understand, am I prepared or not? How do I project what this retirement thing is going to look like? A good amount of folks, and this is still true today, again, these are a little bit older statistics, but still true, that plenty of people are not prepared. Doesn't mean that nobody's allowed to retire, but it does mean that a lot of folks, the way they're currently set up, may be out of balance with either the assets they have, the expectations they have of retirement. And that's the biggest thing on our end that, really for me personally, I try to do with folks when we're having retirement planning conversations. It's not to, it's not to force somebody to work longer or, tell them they have to reach some certain milestone. It's mainly just to make sure things are in balance, whether it's a low level of assets and a lower expectation of living expenses, or, pushing towards a much higher level of assets with, that can support more retirement spending. So either one is right. There's no right or wrong for what retirement has to look like for anybody, but it is important to make sure you've got the assets to support whatever of lifestyle you want in retirement. And that's where I think a stat like this comes from, that a lot of people are out of balance. And if they don't recognize, some adjustments they need to make, and they just kind of haphazardly go for it, may not work out well when you throw in that folks are living longer. A lot of us will make it into our, into our 90s anymore. So let's see, number 8. And same thing, that this is kind of geared towards the fact that I think this presentation was put on by or originally put out by a life insurance company, but valid concern. And it's one of the biggest things that, that comes up when I'm talking with folks personally with retirement planning, is that's the whole fear, is how do I switch over from being supported by my income, which I know that, hey, I can always go out and work some more, to being supported by, Social Security, which you might think is good, you might think is shaky, pensions if you have them, or your own invested monies that you've built up. Again, it can be kind of hard to understand what those sources of income can really do for you, which is what leads to this fear of folks just thinking, if I stop working, if I stop the thing that I've been used to doing for 40 years to bring in money, how well is this other way of doing it going to bring in money? So that's where that big fear of running out of money comes from, which is the whole reason we plan for it. So this one I just wanted to touch on, and I see people do this all the time, and it's because of that, one of those first stats where you say, hey, it's kind of hard to understand or plan for, or really know where you stand retirement wise. So this is what a lot of folks do, is they'll look for some kind of rule of thumb, some kind of standard thing to basically tell them when to retire, and to say, okay, I guess I'll do that. And I've seen people do that, on a personal level too. So whether it's some kind of round number, hey, if I hit $1 million, I can retire, or retirement being a certain age, 65 is still in everybody's mind as the retirement age, versus thinking of it as, I need to get to a certain amount of money. Other people might go by tax rules. That's the third one, that you can most commonly easily get to retirement monies, IRAs, 401ks at 59 and a half. That's not always the case. You don't need to necessarily focus on that. Other ones, like these next couple, see people do this all the time too. They'll just look at somebody, maybe it's a coworker or somebody in what they think is a similar situation, and say, well, Bob did it, I guess I can go. Or Bob says he can never retire, maybe that means I'm not ready to, without really understanding more of that. And the last one, which I bet if I talk to some of the folks in here, that would come up. A lot of times we'll have conversations, and we always plan minimum out to age 90, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but plenty of times it comes up. Sometimes I think it's a joke, but sometimes I think people really think this way as a way to compensate for maybe not being quite as prepared. And they'll say, well, it doesn't matter, my dad died when he was 78, I'm not going to make it into my 80s, or I don't really plan to go past 85. Well, you don't have ultimate control over that. And the alternate to not preparing for making it to 80, 85, 90 is those cannot be happy years if we don't at least assume we'll make it that long, which statistically you will, with updated, life expectancy and things like that. Number 10 years. And yeah, so this kind of goes back to the part that, absolutely applies to folks pre-retirement, but really it's things that we can all start looking at regardless of age. First one, which is probably the biggest thing, like if I could come up with some kind of course to give people and like teach people how to budget, that's probably the biggest thing that I could help everybody with, or that people need help with. It's outside my actual scope of what I do, but other than talking just as somebody that personally I think does decent with budgeting. But that ties into so many things while you're younger, while you're working, while you're preparing for retirement, when you get into retirement. One of the biggest questions as, the retirement planner is just, okay, we've got these assets, we're building them up. What do they need to do? How much spending do they need to support? And it, never fails that the vast majority of people don't exactly know, because what most folks do is they get used to a certain level of money coming in, and they make sure they can meet whatever required obligations they have, different payments, mortgage, car payment, whatever it is. And then the rest of it that's not specifically allocated to something just kind of goes somewhere. And, more people than not, they get the tax time, they get their W-2s, they say, man, I made how much money? And they look around and are kind of confused at where it went. That's a symptom of, or a result of, just being kind of too loose with the budgeting. So, I mean, budgeting, regardless of age, it needs to be a skill while you're working. It needs to be a skill while you're transitioning and ultimately in retirement, because, I mean, being in control of your money, that, you can prevent a lot of, a lot of negative things from happening there. So it's just something that, if anybody in here feels like, yeah, I don't really have too much of a plan, ask me about it. I'll at least talk to you personally, rather than, as like the advisor, because I don't have some kind of program for it. But very, very, very important. The health insurance consideration, I'll touch on that a little bit later on, but that, in the scope of this presentation, mainly, my takeaway from it is, if somebody retires 65 and beyond, it's fairly easy to predict, at least right now with the current laws and rules, what, the expenses and the expectations of Medicare will be. If somebody retires before 65, doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just much more murky with what your options are, and again, I'll touch on these in a little bit, but that's when I'd say that mainly pertains to the pre-65 folks that retire. And you got to either figure out if you can get on a spouse's plan, if you can get something from the kind of the public market, just the health insurance exchanges, some of these alternate options. Long-term care, again, that's a complicated one. I'll touch on that a little bit towards the end. I don't necessarily think everybody has to have some kind of long-term care coverage. There's a lot of different versions of it now. So again, I'll touch on that more in a little bit. Risky investments, I would mainly just say that would be an example of somebody that is very, very, very close to retirement, and they're still at that point too aggressive with their investments. It could just be too stock heavy. It could be that they have some investments in, some individual stocks, or maybe they're over focused in certain areas. Heard plenty of folks, and people are having that conversation now, saying, hey, we're in a bit of a market downturn. I'm gonna have to delay retirement. Well, if somebody was that close to probably retiring, they should have had at that point some different cushions built in, either with a boosted up savings account or emergency fund, or some different allocations with investments. Doesn't mean things can't, I mean, every market downturn is fairly unexpected when it starts. But again, a common error of somebody getting close to retirement might be not having quite enough cushion to deal with something unexpected, and that may indeed derail your plans. And then finally, tax planning. Again, I'll touch on that a little bit later, but there are various things that are different tax-wise in retirement versus when you're earning income. There's different strategies around having different types of accounts, pulling from different accounts for different needs. Again, some people just kind of go into it and think, okay, I got this lump of money, I got my $1 million or whatever it might be, and not consider that if that $1 million is in a 401k or an IRA, for example, it's not bad. I mean, I'd still take it, but it's not $1 million spendable dollars. If you're not careful with it, it might be 700 by the time you get it home and pay the tax man. So just another detail that people can easily overlook. And finally, and this is more something that I think, if somebody's close to retirement, we got to do some quick catch up. But these are things to maybe note for the 30 and 40-year-old crowd in here too, if there are any of you. We'll touch on Roth IRAs in a little bit, just a different structure of account. It's basically just a different set of tax rules for an investment account that can bring a lot of flexibility in retirement if you have built something like that up. Paying off debt from retirement account or 401k. Again, sometimes that's people's plans that they're still carrying, mortgage debt, car debt, unexpected, whatever it might be, they're still carrying that into retirement. Their first plan might be, hey, when I can get at that 401k or that IRA without penalty, I'm going to go ahead and pay off this $50,000 or $100,000 of debt. I mean, might not be the worst thing in the world to do, but ideally, you don't want to have to face that choice when you get there. Yeah, so again, for the 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds in here, if there are any of you, just another example of something that is more efficient to work on with your earned income while you're still bringing it in versus a last second, kind of Hail Mary catch up that's going to rock that retirement account from the get-go. Social Security, again, I'll talk about that as a specific thing under the income part, but there's a little, I don't like to make, and y'all might remember from last year, I don't think Social Security is as complicated as some people make it out to be, but there still should be a little planning around when you take it, 62, 66, 70, somewhere in between. So we'll touch on that. I mentioned just in the previous slide, overexposure to one stock. I only see this, well, not only, but I most often see this if somebody's working for a company that offers company stock. It can become kind of natural to, end up with a lot of that. Dominion guys are my best example because I work with a lot of them, Dominion Power. And it wasn't uncommon to see somebody with 75% of their money in Dominion stock. And it's a good company, it's conservative, and it's, I'm sure they think doing that much better because that individual person works there. That's what we all think. But at the same time, a little risky to have all that riding on one company, an unexpected earthquake, for example, like we had I was just talking about this yesterday, in like 2010 or 11 up in Louisa. And all of a sudden, if there's an issue at the North Anna Dominion nuclear plant, there goes your company, there goes your salary, there goes your pension that they offer. And all of a sudden there goes your 401k too, because you had it all in a company stock. So, unexpected things can happen. I've actually started to see, again, on the Dominion example, companies are now limiting how much. I think Dominion employees are now limited to 20%. They can only have 20% of their 401k in their own company stock. And they do that just to, again, sometimes kind of protect people from getting in over their head or getting too much exposure in one place, even if it's, their own company, which they love. And finally, again, something I don't see this as often, but probably a good thing to bring up now that there's, some market volatility and something new in the news every single day, is over reliance on, money in savings accounts, CDs, things like that, and thinking that that's the true, complete, like risk-free way to go. It is something like that is free, is protected from stock market risk because you're not in there. It's protected from, interest rate risk in the bond market. Doesn't mean there are not their own risks, inflation risk being the main one that can, still work against you, even in a quote risk-free place like a bank account or a CD. Nothing wrong with those. I'm a fan of people having probably an above average amount in a nice, boring, losing money to inflation place like a bank account or a CD. You just don't want to get overboard there, which I guess that's the takeaway for just about anything anymore is, don't go too far to any of the extremes. 12, I will skip this one. And I guess just to give myself a quick breather, any questions yet, or I don't know if anybody's jumped in. Okay, cool. I'll keep going. All right, so next few slides will pertain to the income side. This is obviously one of the biggest concerns with somebody moving into retirement is I'm now gonna, and again, I know that anymore, retirement doesn't always mean the traditional, I quit, I stop working, I never earn another dollar a day in my life, and I just start living off of pension, Social Security, investments. That's not as common for anybody anymore. Obviously, there's all kinds of options with part-time work, with staying on as a consultant somewhere. But just on the, I guess, going back to just the traditional path of, even if it's not completely, most folks, let's say when they get into their 60s or so, if not before, they will at least drastically reduce their earned income. So then the big question is, how do I make that up from somewhere else? So again, the common sources that people have, and I'll kind of click through these things. 55 is kind of a first stage where if somebody has a 401k plan, I know a lot of you guys in here are business owners or self-employed, but for anyone that has a 401k, kind of a traditional plan through a company, those actually open up at age 55 if you were to retire or separate from those companies. So mid 50s, there could be some accessible money in some traditional 401ks or retirement accounts. 59 is the true, kind of standard penalty-free age for everything: 401ks, IRAs, any sort of tax-deferred retirement accounts like that. Now there is, I don't remember if this comes up in a future slide, but I'll just mention it now. Those numbers are legitimate and they're on paper in the tax code. There are also workarounds. If somebody's 52, 56, regardless of age, there are, I won't even call them loopholes, because I mean they're legal. There are strategies and things that you can do, steps that you can take to access 401k, IRA type money before 59 and a half, or even before 55 in this example. It just requires certain steps, certain planning. You have to adhere to certain rules. So these numbers are the easy ones. That's when there's just an easy penalty-free version of IRA and 401k. Doesn't mean you're not allowed to do anything before that. There's just extra hoops to jump through and some certain things, but I mean, they're doable. I've got a few people that are in the process of taking distributions before these ages right now, and we're avoiding penalty. It's just, we got to go through a certain process to do so. Age 60 is the earliest age somebody, if you're a surviving spouse, if you're, mid 50s and your spouse passed away, age 60 is the earliest age you can get Social Security benefits as a widow. 62 is the earliest you can get Social Security benefits as an individual person. Caveat being, if you take Social Security at 62, 63, 64, anytime before your whatever's listed as your quote full retirement age, which for a lot of people is now 67. For most anybody, it's between 66 and 67. So if you do take Social Security earlier than that, which I'm a fan of in the right situation, but you have to be aware, if you do it early, there's a pretty low earnings cap where I think now it's gotten itself up to, call it $18,000. I know it's not over $20,000, but call it 18 or 19,000 bucks. So if you take Social Security early, you're still allowed to earn a little bit of income, but if it's more than about 18 or 19,000, they're going to start pulling some of it back. It becomes a kind of a frustrating calculation. So I'll tell people that's typically the biggest thing to think about. If you're retiring early and you're saying, well, should I start Social Security early or not? The first thing I'll ask is, do you plan to still work and earn a little part-time income? Because if you have good reason to believe you're going to go out and earn a couple grand a month, I would almost always tell that person not to mess with taking Social Security, because it's just going to become, kind of a back and forth for several years until you hit full retirement age. Once you get to full retirement age, 66, 67, whenever, there is no cap. You can take Social Security, you can go earn 100 grand a year, you can do whatever you want. But there is that caveat. If you're in the early stage, 62 to 66 or 67, if you take it early, then you do have to watch out for how much other money you earn. So that can influence the decision. 65 is the standard age for Medicare. Again, we'll touch on that when we kind of get down to health insurance. Between 66 and 67, depending on your birthday, is quote full Social Security. 70 is actually the maximum age. Most people, I think, know this, but with Social Security, a lot of people lock in on that quote full retirement age. I think mainly because, going back to one of those first slides, it's just something that gives you some kind of guiding point to grab onto. They say, well, hey, full, I guess that's full, I should just take it. A lot of people do, depending on all the other details in somebody's plan and financial life. If there's reason or ability to not take it at 67, maybe you can delay it till 68, 69, 70. the amount is going to increase by roughly 8% or so for every year that you wait. So again, we'll kind of go through Social Security more completely, but various things might lead somebody to actually wait until as late as age 70. And I think the final one on here, this is an outdated statistic. This is now 72. But yes, at age, used to be 70 and a half. Now it is age 72. That's when required distributions start. So what that is if you've got a 401k, an IRA, any of those pre-tax retirement accounts that, any account that's going to be taxed as income when you pull it, which is traditional IRA, 401k, 457, 403b, some of, a lot of the common company retirement accounts. At age 72, whether you've started taking distributions before or not, at age 72, there is a table, there's an IRS life expectancy table that they start setting a minimum for how much you have to pull out every year. First year for 72-year-olds going to be close to 3.8 or maybe 4%. Next year it's going to be about 4.2, 4.5, 4.8. The percent that you have to take out of your account grows every single year for the sole purpose of generating some activity and getting some tax revenue going. Again, there's certain strategies that you can apply with that depending on depending on other things in your life, if you're doing charitable giving, things like that. So we'll hit on that one later too, but that's just the final thing on this little chart as far as different standard rules that are in place. Again, early on in your 50s, things start freeing up with retirement accounts. In your 60s, it's various Social Security options and Medicare that come on the table. And then once you get to 70 and 72, that's when some of those maximums, you can't delay Social Security any beyond 70. You can't delay pulling out of retirement accounts past 72. So that's when some required things start happening, is in your early 70s.
Alex, question for you.
Yeah.
So in my understanding of it is that at the age of 70, you must start pulling Social Security.
Yeah.
And age 72, you must start to pull some distributions from your retirements. But is that true for the Roth?
The Roth is excluded.
Because that's
right.
a post-tax, right?
Yeah. And again, go back to, what we all assume the true motivation of that required distribution rule is again, I'll try my best to not let anything political enter, because we'll all just start getting frustrated. But that was political itself, I guess. But age 72, the main reason they've got this required distribution, I mean, you've got people that have tons of money. There's a huge amount of money in IRAs and 401ks. And a lot of people, I mean, I'll tell you many more times than not, people try way too hard to not use it. People very often are a little anxious, a little afraid of, using retirement money. Maybe it's a virtue thing. They say, no, hey, I got my pension. I never want to touch that IRA. That doesn't do the government any good because the money's just sitting there. So that's where age 72, again, it's only, to me, it's only for the purpose of generating some taxable activity. So yes, the rule applies to any account that is going to be taxable when you pull it out. So it's your traditional pre-tax IRAs, it's your traditional 401ks, it's your 403bs, 457s. Those are all workplace type plans. The rule is not there for Roth IRAs because Roth IRA distributions don't generate any taxes anyway. So why, there's no need for them, I guess, to force you to take money out because it's not going to generate any taxable income. So yes, Roths are excluded from that. That's one of the things. I'll go into more of if we have time at the end, and I haven't covered it a lot, I'll touch more on a Roth versus traditional, some of those bullet points. But that's definitely one thing that's a checkbox in the Roth column, is there's no required forced activity from that account like there is with a traditional.
And then the only other question that I had, that maybe you'll go into it, if there's even truth to it, but one of the things I've heard over the past few years is that Social Security in and in itself, while it was created, I believe back in the 40s, when they're projecting it out for the other generations as we're coming up, and then we're looking at the ages and we start to pull it out, that there was at some point a concern or conversation that Social Security wouldn't be available for us. Is that something true in
Yeah,
philosophy?
I'll touch on it now because I don't think it comes up. There's some more specific Social Security stuff, but there's not a ton of like in-depth. I think we talked about it more last year, but no, good question because it's not going to come up as much. So I'll talk about it now. So Social Security, and I don't have the probably most up-to-date stats on it, but this is a pretty accurate ballpark of it. Social Security, for back when it started, there was money coming in. There was more money coming in that was going out because obviously you introduced this new tax on a nation of people, and there's only, a small amount that are on the receiving end of it. That's how it starts. Everyone's paying into it. There's only a small group that's receiving benefit. And then over time, your benefit group starts growing. The workforce is growing too, but just because of just demographics and how there's been plenty of adjustments to the plan over the years. We went from years and years of more money coming in than going out. So that creates the Social Security Trust Fund that still exists. So for years and years, decades, really, there was more money coming in than there was going out. So there was a nice big fat trust fund. And what you're referring to is, last I got an update on it, the projection was like 2032, let's say, give or take 10 years from now. If there are no changes to the system, no changes to the taxes that are assessed, the money that's going out, anything like that, there's still a surplus. There's still a trust fund of extra money. More money has come into Social Security that has been paid out over the last, like you said, 80 years or so. So there is still a positive surplus, so they can pay every amount of money that's been promised to somebody. They're still paying it. Over the next 10 years, I don't know if it's turned the corner yet, but what's going to happen if nothing changes is, over the course of the next 10 years, the benefits going out every year are going to, if they haven't already, I'm not sure, but if they haven't already, they will soon exceed the tax money coming in every year. So then that's kind of like somebody, they work, they save money. So they built up savings over all these years. Now they're spending more than they're earning. Social Security is essentially spending more than it's earning. So they have to dip into that savings every year. The 2032 number, 10 years from now, that's basically saying, at the rate we're going, all that excess, all that savings money will be depleted by 2032. And if nothing changes, then we would have to be money in, money out. The money going out would have to be equalized to the money coming in, which at that point they project is going to be about 75%. So that's where they'll say, hey, if nothing changes, Social Security might get cut by 25% in 10 years. That's a true statement if nothing changes. The wide prediction is, and I mean, I think this is backed up by what we all see happen, again, political, but what everybody kind of thinks is going to happen is what has happened before. Like, there's been plenty of like drop dead dates for Social Security. Doesn't mean in 10 years the system's gone. It means if nothing changes, benefits are going to have to start shrinking because there's not enough money to support them. What's very likely going to happen is they're going to, just like they have several times over the last, several decades, is they'll start incrementally, making little changes that kick that date out from 2032 to 2035 to 2040. It's the kicking the can down the road of just continuing to slowly adjust the plan to, really what it is they're kind of quietly and marginally decreasing the benefits rather than just coming up to some catastrophic date and everyone's check goes from 4,000 to 3,000 or 3,000 to 2,200. The things that they will do is, just like they already have, they'll push that full retirement age to 68, and then they'll push it to 69, they'll push it to 70. That takes some of the heat off the system. There'll eventually be some increases in the taxes that come into it. Maybe they'll increase the earnings cap, because right now people only pay Social Security tax on the first, 112 or so. I think it's 112,000. It's not more than 140 or 50. But it's only on that first chunk of their income. That's the only thing they get credit for, so to speak. Somebody earns $1 million, they that doesn't go on their Social Security record. They just show that they maxed out at 112 or 120 every single year of their earning life. So yeah, with the Social Security thing, definitely valid to say, again, for the younger folks in the room, don't bank on it completely. I mean, even for folks that are retiring now, it's not going to cover everything you got to do. It was always meant to be just a supplement to the other things that you're doing, but it does provide, does provide a lot of benefit. It's there. And unfortunately, for some people, it's the only thing they have. So at least they have something. But yeah, Social Security, I would not plan for the entire thing just to be gone. It's just going to incrementally adjust over the years. And 10 years from now, we'll be saying the drop dead date is 2045. And it'll just keep getting delayed where, we'll probably be having this conversation forever, but I don't see the whole system just ceasing to exist. Did that kind of hit that one? I saw somebody walk in. It's okay.
That answered it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it'll be around, and it's just going to continue to slowly evolve. Which again, over our lifetimes, it is going to continue to get weaker and weaker. It's just, I don't think it's going to happen all at once. It's going to be like, death of 1,000 cuts, I guess. So all that to say, it'll be there, and definitely need to plan for other things and not put but so much reliance on it. It's kind of the icing on the cake. Hey, if the government wants to send me some money, I'll take it, but I'm not going to completely rely on it. All right, so going into still on the income, kind of spending conversation. And I don't know, sometimes I like rules of thumb, sometimes I don't. I think it's a decent rule of thumb to say, hey, if I got to plan for something, how much of my, current salary do I need to kind of enjoy retirement? And a lot of times you'll pretty commonly see that 70 to 80 or 85%. Again, that's not like an end all be all. You'll probably be okay. You can figure it out if you do that, but planning can really get a lot more detailed than that, because some people have, very, very large salaries as they're approaching retirement, and they might not need half of that to actually do the retirement they need, because maybe they don't have any bills, they don't have any expenses, taxes are much cheaper, they're not going to be adding to retirement accounts. So all this slide was just, kind of a starting point. Again, you can look at, studies and kind of real broad rules of thumbs to say, hey, 70 to 80 or 85%, that's kind of where people commonly fall. But there's nothing at all saying if you save and prepare, you can line yourself up for the goal of a raise in retirement. And at the same time, and I've got people that I know and love that do both, there's nothing at all wrong with planning for and working towards a smaller, more condensed retirement. Usually that's the folks that retire earlier. I always use my mom as an example. She was a public school teacher for I don't know how long, way too long. And so she retired at 62, knowing it was going to be a little smaller than if she went at 63, 64, 65. But for her, as an example, it's not right or wrong, but she valued those extra years not teaching public school kids in Suffolk, Virginia, a little more than she did being able to bring in an extra $300 or $400 a month that was already above and beyond what she needed. So really it can go, I like, rules of thumbs give us something to do, but it can go either way. And again, traditionally, once you move into retirement, a lot of the expenses that drop, obviously work-related, travel, food and things that revolve around your job, that's all done because you're not traveling and doing that. Hopefully for everybody in here, hopefully mortgage and debt is close to, if not off the table in retirement. That's a big relief on the budget. Income taxes in general are cheaper in retirement. You're not paying into Social Security anymore. You're not paying FICA taxes. You're not paying into Medicare. So taxes are a little easier for retirement income versus earned income. Sometimes though, things go up. Obviously, healthcare gets more and more expensive for a lot of people. Well, for everybody, cost of living just increases every year. Hot topic now, of course. And a lot of what people don't plan for is they say, well, hey, I'm used to living on X amount a month. And all of a sudden they've got an extra 8 or 10 hours in their day every single day because they're not traveling to and working. You may need to plan for obviously spending on extra, what are you going to do next? Extra leisure activities, things like that. And again, insurance is kind of broad. We'll hit that in just a second. But yeah, just on the general spending, this gives you something to go by, but man, so many things can change. It is not to say everybody even needs some kind of long drawn out detailed plan, but it is very personalized, I guess I would say, as far as that goes. And then this one, again, I'll admit, old set of stats. It is very true. And it's still, if anything, I think extended a little bit, but it's just kind of the eye opener that, hey, if you've got a couple that's retiring at, 60, husband and wife, for example, they easily have a common life expectancy of 30 more years. That's why we plan to a minimum of 90. If somebody's already 62, 65, 70, life expectancy for those groups is still going to be another 30, 28, 27 years. We're all living longer is basically the point. If you've got you got a couple in their mid 60s, there's a very good chance that at least one of them will make it to 90, and still a decent chance that one of them will make it to 95. That's why I don't kind of adjust it when people say, well, hey, plan to 90, but I'm going to go when I'm 80, or, we don't know that. And the numbers would tell us we're all going to live for a while. So that's why we get a plan for a long retirement, because you don't want to have to undo something, or, kind of frustrating to run out of money when you're 85. All right, so last kind of quick hit on income. So this is just the comp, for an average group of people, where their different sources of income come from. And this covers just about anybody I ever talk to. I mean, a good chunk is going to come from Social Security. A lot of times, like I said, a third to maybe 40% of the common person's monthly income is going to be that Social Security check. A little planning we can do with that. Pensions, retirement plans, IRAs, that's a smaller amount. Pensions aren't really as prevalent anymore. And again, retirement plans, IRAs, that's just kind of your workplace stuff that's going to come in and make up a chunk. Personal savings and investments, that's just any non-retirement stuff, a different classification of account, but that'd be your, just your regular brokerage accounts, your stocks that you have at E-Trade or TD Ameritrade or something, savings accounts, things like that. And not uncommon at all for folks, whether it's a necessity or planned for, or whether you just get bored, to bring in some part-time employment. I mean, it's hard to be conditioned to work for 50 years and then kind of turn it off for some people. So all these things are just kind of what makes up the common, the common combination of somebody's retirement income. Again, going back to Social Security, I won't hit on this too much because we covered a bunch a minute ago. But with Social Security, and I'll see what the next slide is. Main things that I covered, I remember I talked about it last year too. It's not as complicated of a system as a lot of people make it out to be. It used to be a little more. There was some loopholes and some cool strategies that were figured out by an advisor, actually, not me, but somebody smarter than me, but somebody figured it out, and it became this big, cool planning topic for probably 7-8 years. And then government figured it out. They legislated it out of there. So it's kind of weeded out. There used to be some cool strategies, no point in talking about them because almost nobody can do it anymore. So now I would just simply think about Social Security. It's fairly linear. If you take it early, you get a lot of small checks. If you take it close to normal retirement age, you get a decent number of medium-sized checks. If you push it off somewhere towards age 70, you get a lot of, you can see my cursor here. You get fewer, large checks. If you plot all that out, and I would have adjusted this, again, this is a little bit older, I would have adjusted it a little bit. If you whether you take it at 62, 66, 70, anywhere in between, especially if you throw a little extra math in there and account for like potential growth of that. Some people take Social Security early and then invest it, for example. There's a value to be placed on that. If you account for all that, and if I would have gone in and adjusted this, you would generally find that these lines for the guy that takes it at 62, 66, 70, again, if you account for, some inflation, some potential growth of that money, some time value of that money, those lines typically converge around early 80s, call it 81, 82 or so. That's not a big, a big secret or a big surprising thing. It's all that is to say, this system is basically, give or take a small amount of money, it's basically designed to give the average person, which, from birth, life expectancy is still early 80s, 81, 82. It's designed to give the average person about the same amount of money, regardless of when they start it. Just like an insurance company, government, they don't know when each of us is going to die, but they know actuarially, if you look at a big enough group of people, they kind of know when the average person is going to die. So they designed the system to just say, whether somebody takes it early, late, whatever, the system will give the average person about the same amount of money. Now, the planning that comes into it is more one-on-one, more personal, to say, hey, are there either compelling reasons that you think you won't make it to life expectancy, whether it's lifestyle choices, family health history, chronic conditions you've already got, that can be reason to go ahead and get yourself in the earlier path. You might also have grandma that's 110 years old and you're fit as you can be, and you might have reason to think that you're going to live way beyond, early 80s. Then if you're only looking at the numbers, you would get more money once you get out here mid-late 80s. You would get much more money taking it later. Again, no secret to the way that the plan works. Really, it's just kind of personalizing into each situation. I've seen plenty of times where if somebody doesn't have a lot of extra money to lean on and they want to retire early, they might have no other choice but to turn on Social Security early. Even if they thought they were going to live a long time, they just need the money now. And other times I've found where a good example is, I got a couple that they don't have kids or anything, and they've got a good amount of invested money. They're willing to live on their invested money more in these early years so that they can get themselves to age 70. Not to say they don't have anybody to leave it on to, but they don't have that, I guess, that same thought of like, hey, I want to make sure I have a bunch of this to leave on to my kids. So like those are examples of personal things that can kind of push you up or down a little bit and when you take it. The joke with Social Security is just, to know what your perfect filing day is to know what day you're going to die, and you can do the math. But of course, none of us know that. And finally,
Alex,
yes.
question for you.
Yes.
So to just clarify, my understanding is that Social Security, similar to pensions,
Are not transferable to offspring or family, correct?
No. Again, good point. So no, it never goes down to your, I mean, if somebody passes away early and they've got minor kids like under 16, there are some Social Security benefits that go to those kids. But no, I mean, if you're, married in your mid 70s, you got your kids are 40, they still get that same like $255 death benefit that the life insurance commercials talk about. A spousal, a continued Social Security benefit only goes to spouses, and that's something to sometimes give a little consideration to. But no, nothing goes to your kids. So that's where, there can be, again, personal reasons where some people might want to take it early because they want to get as much government money as they can and maybe take the heat off of their 401ks and IRAs, because whatever's left in those accounts can go to the husband, can go to the wife, can go to the kids. So that's another good example of just something that might be thrown in the pot to, to talk or to kind of help make that decision. That's a legacy conversation. But yes, absolutely. Not much to hit on with pensions. Obviously, some people have them, some people don't. I would imagine most people in here are, again, either the business owners or self-employed. probably not a lot of pensions. There's a little planning that can go with that. So if anybody has a pension and wants to talk more about it, I'll just say, give me a call or check with me later, because we can talk more one-on-one about it. There's some planning and some life insurance type conversations that can go along with that. But my guess is that doesn't apply too much to the group here. Again, on this one, I kind of already hit on these, but other types of accounts, there's various places you can do investments, and the main difference is different tax rules and things. So that I'll touch on that in just a second. And again, part-time work, more often than not, everyone thinks they're going to retire, go fish all day, they get bored, and they go work somewhere just for something to do. Like, we all need a little, a little structure, a little purpose, if you will. So it's not uncommon ideally you want to go into retirement without the financial requirement to work part-time. And if you do, it's just your choice, and it's some extra, gas and having fun money. But again, more often than not, I'd say people end up doing a little work that they're not planning for. And it's just because sometimes you just need something to do. I'll skip that one. 24. And yeah, so just going back to planning, and this is kind of shifting us into that spending part. Again, the biggest thing that we try to figure out, like with doing retirement planning, is how much money that's the whole thing. That's what this all hinges on, is how much money do you need to bring in every month? And then we start breaking down what sources is it coming from, and how do we generate it when we have to generate it from retirement, or from, investment money, because obviously as investment advisor, that's the actual part that we do, is help manage those investment accounts. But just a quick basic, they call it back of the envelope approach, is to come up with that retirement need, whenever you want to go, 60, 65, the age doesn't really matter. But, you think, okay, I need $4,000 a month to run my household. Okay, I'll get 2,000 from Social Security. I think this fills itself in. I'll get a couple thousand from Social Security. So I need to get 2 from somewhere else. Not going to work part-time. That means I need to pull it from investments. You can kind of work backwards there and do a little math and figure out, okay, well, how big of an investment account do I then need? Again, this is a real basic version of stuff we can talk about more completely. Withdrawal rates. And then same thing, rules of thumb, if somebody's, kind of going at it themselves, pretty common to say between 4 and 5%. There's a lot of, research and different things that go that try to come up with that number to give somebody that rule of thumb. I would say, just as a quick takeaway, we're usually pretty comfortable with somebody got up closer to 5%, but way more goes into it than just putting it in and letting it go. So again, if you're going to be very, very hands off on it, you might want to be down in that 4% range, but we usually kind of plan for folks around the 5% range. But again, that's an important part of figuring all this out, is looking at how much money you got and figuring how much you can reliably pull off of it. I'll skip that one. Let me flip real quick. And I'll kind of go over, I'll breeze over investments real quick. Obviously, it's probably what we should talk a lot about, because when markets are kind of up and down, everybody starts freaking out. Quick takeaway, try not to do anything, try not to make any rash decisions. We have to have some assumption that the economy will go on. There's tons of strength and tons of positive numbers. I read a news story yesterday, and the headline was, market is down on the back of positive news. We're in a weird dynamic where good can be bad, bad can be good. We got the Fed interjection. Things are just kind of out of whack with inflation, with supply chain, with the Russia thing. But there's always things in the news like that. And I'd say we generally have to assume that things are going to even out a little bit, and, we'll always recover, because if we don't, there's no point in talking about this stuff anyway. But just quick takeaways on investments. There's obviously different structures of accounts. It's good to, especially when you're going towards retirement, understand what you got, make sure you're in a comfortable approach, and stay diversified so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. 31. And real quick on insurance, I know I'm kind of coming up on time here, but my quick takeaway on insurance, life insurance, I see the main need for somebody while they're still working. I don't think everybody necessarily needs a life insurance policy for their entire life to try to create some kind of legacy for somebody. There are ways to plan for that and to, do some creative things, but generally, I think of life insurance as protecting your income while you're working. And then hopefully once you get towards retirement, your house is very well established financially and you don't need a bunch of insurance at that point. Disability, again, it's often an employee benefit. If for some reason folks in here don't have something like that, feel free to ask me about it. You can get them either through your employer, through like a professional organization, or you can buy private policies. Health insurance, I don't personally do anything with that. Again, touching on what we said earlier, 65 and up, it's pretty predictable with Medicare. And as far as retirement planning, if somebody's not 65, their best course of action is either if they can get on a spouse's company plan, that's predictable, or you're looking at paying for it out of pocket, which is expensive. It doesn't have to be prohibitive, but it is expensive. Or doing, kind of one of the alternates. I do like a MediShare. It's one of these faith-based things, and it works pretty good. You just got to understand what you got and if it would work for you. And then long-term care, same thing. That's a very big conversation. There's a lot of different versions of it. You're either going to pay a good amount in a variety of ways for a policy because it's an expensive thing to pay for. You're going to pay for it out of your pocket if you need it, kind of roll the dice, or you just eventually spend through all your money and you're covered by Medicaid. I wouldn't say that's a goal. Some people try to hide all their money, which you can sometimes do, and say, I'm going to make the state pay for it. That means you're on Medicaid and you're in a facility that even accepts it, which there's not a lot of them, and it's kind of dicey. So I wouldn't rush towards that. And then finally, let me jump towards, just talk through all those. On tax planning, main thing I was going to hit on there is just being conscious of different structures of accounts, Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, 401ks. They all have different tax rules and they can be combined. And there's some strategy around using different ones at different times and different ones for different purposes to try to minimize the tax that you ultimately pay in retirement. So it's good to kind of get that figured out before you retire. And for the pre-retired folks, it's just good to build up a variety of different buckets from a tax standpoint. And I think I got one more. I'll skip a couple of these. Oh, Jesus. Finally, and I know we're coming up on the end of the time, 47. Well, yeah, this is just what I was just talking about with having different buckets that have different tax rules applied to them. And part of planning is just being conscious of what you got, being careful about pulling different things from different times. And then finally, with estate planning, again, my last 30 seconds, I don't do wills, I don't do trusts, anything like that, but it doesn't have to be terribly complicated. You can pass any financial thing, any investment account, any bank account, anything with money in it. You can do it with your house too. I know in the state of Virginia, just with a beneficiary form or a TOD form, that keeps anything that you're talking about out of probate. It's a short conversation at the courthouse. You do need a will. Will just kind of gives your final wishes and what do you do with the stuff in my house. But it doesn't, for a lot of people, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Normally when you get a will done, you kind of hit the power of attorney, the medical things, the what happens if I go in the hospital. So it is good to have that conversation and kind of at least get that in place. But other than that, if you don't have a complicated thing with like blended family or wanting to limit who gets what monies and things like that, if it's just kind of a straight, my kids 50-50, or I'm leaving everything to my wife, something like that, you can cover all that with any financial account and your house with beneficiary forms and TOD forms. And that solves the problem of keeping things out of probate, keeping the process pretty easy. And yeah, that was the last of it. It took way longer than I thought it was, so I apologize. But yeah, it looks like there's still a couple folks on. I'm 100% open to chatting with anybody that wants to ask about any of this stuff or anything after the fact. Answer. I mean, I can stay on now. I don't know if y'all have another session or not, but I can hang here for a little bit if you guys got any questions.
We can open it up to questions if there's
Yeah.
anyone that wants to unmute themselves or type in.
Who's
Good
Royal
morning.
Pumping Well?
Yes, good morning, Alex.
How are you?
I really enjoyed your presentation this morning.
Yeah.
It was I did notice in your third to last slide,
Uh-oh.
you talked about estate plan and that it said see handout. Is that something that is available if we wanted to contact you and get a copy of a
Yeah.
guidance?
It is. I'll honestly off the top of my head, I don't know what it is. So this presentation was one that, you know, we've done. It's a little bit old, but it kind of gave me just a guide to go through. But yeah, I'll see what it is. I'm sure there is whatever that handout was. But yeah, I'll check on that. I'll get your just make sure Christina has your information. I'll see what it is, and I'm sure I can send it over to you.
Yeah, that's fine. If you want to just direct it through Christina,
Okay.
and to me, that'd be fine. It may be something that, she may even want for the association just to
Yeah.
see what a copy.
Yeah. That's and I'll see it. It may just be a little bit of an expansion of what I talked about, but I mean, for a while now, and I really solidified this years ago. We did a presentation where we had an estate planning lawyer going through all this stuff, and even his takeaway, and this is the guy that would just love to write you a trust, like some people get kind of trust happy and everybody needs a trust. But he said the same thing that it's kind of where I got it from, that hey, for most common situations, standard, spouse, kids, like if you don't want to put any kind of extra rules or limits on things, you can do a whole lot with beneficiary forms and TOD on your bank account and things like that. That still, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't settle estates, but I have gone with people and sat with them at the courthouse and walked them through. And it can be, if you're clean on all this stuff, it can be a very short, concise conversation at the courthouse, and it's not much to deal with. You just go to the holder of each account and just process, beneficiary claims, and that's for them to do. So, but yeah, I will check and see what the handout is that goes along with this, or any other information I can kind of easily get together, and definitely send that over to you.
Okay, I appreciate that. I do have one more question, if I may, real quick.
Yeah.
You were showing taking Social Security benefits at 62, 65,
Yeah.
60, and 70.
Uh-huh.
Kind of what I saw in that graph that you had.
Yeah. I got
It's the same. Everything's looking to about the age of 90. So it's the same dollar amount, but the earlier you take it, it's just the lower amount of money you'll receive per month, assuming you live to the age of 90.
You're talking about for, let's see, I think it was that one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So on that one, what that is so what that one is showing is, then again, it's a little bit outdated, but the numbers are still ultimately the same, and they would be a little bit closer if I made some adjustments to it that I think would generally be made. But this still gets the point across. This gray line is somebody 62. They're getting small checks, but they're starting them early, so they're banking it. They're getting it. But it's not as steep. If somebody waits a little bit, 66, 70, their checks are larger, which is why their line is steeper. So where they would, again, if I adjusted it a little bit, I would say they would generally converge, around this age. Again, basically, if you accounted for this age 62 money and thought, okay, well, if I'm taking that, I don't have to lean on my investment, so that's worth something. Like if you kind of apply a little bit of a growth rate to it, this line would steepen a little bit because you're getting all this money early on. So I'd say they really kind of connect up here early 80s. So all this is to show is regardless of when you start down here at the beginning, you're going to hit that similar with this person's assumed income and everything. There's all the assumptions at the bottom. That person would have gotten, let's call it $700,000 of total checks, total direct deposits. Now they would have hit 700,000 total, around age 81. And that's whether it's a lot of small checks starting at 62 or a few bigger checks starting at 70. Sorry, that wrong way. I clicked something. that break even is around early 80s or so. What this is showing is if you were to continue beyond that early 80s, you live longer than that, essentially that's where you've now broken even on everything. So every check beyond that, you know, if there were checks that you got when you're 70, well, that's a lot bigger. Like the later you take it, you start taking off and ultimately banking even more money if you had waited if you had waited later. Yeah, so the break even where they all connect is here like early 80s. If you push it out till 85, 86, even 90, that's when there is ultimately more, you would have gotten more money if you waited until 70 or even 66 versus 62. So that's what that one shows, is like that break even is early 80s, which is normal life expectancy. So that's what I was saying, if you have good reason to think that you will make it beyond normal life expectancy and you can afford to do it, you'll probably, you'll get more money if you wait later beyond normal retirement age. You get yourself closer to this blue line, you'll see the benefit once you get, mid and late 80s. I guess that's the takeaway from that.
Understood. So another way I look at this, or what I see too, as soon as you decide to, let's say, retire, or another way, reduce your monthly income greatly, then that's the time to start taking your Social Security benefits.
It can be, so when I'm doing plans for folks, and I mean, it's all over the place. Like, there's a different, are you Kyle's dad, by the way?
No, I'm not.
It's the
I'm
same
Kyle's-
company. Okay.
Kyle's-
I thought I recognized the name of the Royal Pump and Well, and I knew his dad was, sorry. Anyway.
You're
No,
fine.
so
That's
yeah.
fine.
So when I'm doing, like going through a plan for somebody, which is a whole different program that I'll use. I think you were saying like, hey, if I retire, I've cut out my earned income. I got to make it up from somewhere. Yeah. So it just depends on what areas of preparation folks are, basically where they're prepared. I've seen it where somebody might retire 55, 60, pre-62, and because we don't want to put but so much heat on their invested money, they might not have that much. We have no choice, but like the only way it will work is to bring in Social Security at 62 or 65. Others might be very, very well prepared with a lot of 401k, a lot of IRA money. I'd say a lot relative to how much they need to spend. And they, we might do some math and figure, okay, they can afford to overspend, let's say maybe take, instead of 5%, 6, 7, 8% out of those accounts, take it more aggressively than normal. Maybe they can afford to do that throughout their 60s, knowing that at age 70, that big Social Security check is going to swoop in and take a lot of the heat off of the retirement account at that point. So it really is, it's not automatic for anybody. It just depends. It's just weighing all those different factors of, again, health and lifestyle. Do you think you're going to be later or early, as far as like how long you might make it, that can factor into it. But yeah, the main thing is what other assets you have. And if we're in a situation where we have no choice but to bring in Social Security early, we do it, and we go into it knowing, okay, hey, it's still fairly priced, to normal life expectancy. So I'm not like shooting myself in the foot, but I understand that by taking it early, I might give up some eventual money. But again, one thing that I really try to stress to people is it's not all about, at least to me, I don't know, maybe I don't value money enough, but it's not all about like, did I get the most money out of something just so I know that I beat the system. I mean, you waited, like you, for example, waiting for, going from 66 to 70, that just might result in you or anybody in a similar situation working more years than they had to. And the person that gets the ultimate benefit from that is either the spouse or the kids or the nephews or whoever the money is left to, which is cool. Like somebody gets it, and we all like being noble givers. But yeah, a lot of times I can see, if somebody gets too caught up in something like this, they just, they work longer than they arguably have to. And that excess from working longer, they might not even really get to enjoy it during their life. It just might be more that gets left on to somebody else, which is still fine. And that's very important to a lot of people. But yeah, most of, like, if I'm doing planning with somebody, it's mainly focused on what's that number that you need or want to bring into the household every month to call it an enjoyable retirement. And then to me, I'm kind of like, well, I at least want to show somebody how early you can get to that. Doesn't mean you have to do it. Doesn't mean you have to take me up on it. But I like for somebody to know how early can you hit that 4,000 or 5,000 a month that you say you need. And if you can hit it at 58, well, man, retire and enjoy some early years while you got your health. But I got plenty of other people that, again, another example I always give is a couple in Midlothian, and they're probably worth $3 or $4 million, and they look phenomenal on paper, and they're very well established. And we're going through these same conversations, and they got to work every single day until they're 65, but it's because their value is on spending, like growing into a larger, like they want to spend a bunch of money on a bunch of extravagant activities once they retire. So it's worth it for them to put in a few more years in jobs that they halfway enjoy, so that they can have that bigger retirement, even if it comes later. So it's kind of a values conversation too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I have one other question just came to mind.
No, as many as you want.
I know we're running over, and I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm fine, man.
Each person that pays into Social Security over their working career,
Mhm.
once the man or woman passes, their Social Security benefit keeps paying the spouse. Once that second to die spouse passes away, and all children are over the age of 21 or whatever, then if there's any remaining Social Security benefit that was paid in, that reverts back to the state, or what happens to that money?
Yeah, so it's not it does. So it's like it's not accounted for. Like every person in the Social Security system has an earnings history. So they have part of the math equation that determines how much money you get, but they don't account for it. Like and what was your, I don't know if I got your name. Just
Robert Royal. Yes.
Right. So they've got a Robert Royal, obviously they got your Social Security number. So they have your earnings history in there, which they then calculate your benefit. You don't have a dedicated account that's got $600,000 in it. Whatever the sum of your contributions are, basically every time you make contributions, that's just getting that quarter or that year on the earnings report. But no, they don't have a dedicated amount of money for everybody. So yeah, the sad example of how the system works is, a couple people put it into it for their whole lives. They're married and they both die when they're 60, and their kids are 35. Well, that's it. You did not get out as much. You didn't get out anything in that case, but you didn't get out nearly what you put in. And on the other end, there's plenty of examples of people that, and technically, I'm not defending that. I think it's we could all, as an investment person, I'd argue that, hey, we could do better if we could just keep that money ourselves and invest it. But a lot of people would still fail at that. They would not do that. And then it's like, what's the government going to do with a bunch of people that are 70 years old and don't have a dime to their name? So it's like, it kind of solves the problem, and it forces people to have some kind of savings later in life that they can't mess up. But it is to the detriment of all. There's plenty of other examples that you say, well, man, I get screwed if this happens to me. It is true. So no, it's there. It covers a husband and a spouse. But that's it. I guess the flip side of saying, hey, there's people that get very little out of it. There's also, I can't remember who it is. It's kind of like a funny statistic, but there's somebody, a famous person that has had several spouses that I think he's got three. It's a gentleman that has 3 or 4 wives that all claim divorce spouse benefits off of his record. So it's like you got this one guy that has earned income over his life, and you've got multiple people that may not have even put into the system, but because of the rules in marriage and divorce, you've got multiple people pulling money off of away from his record, if you will. So but more money coming out of the system than went in examples like that. So like just like anything, insurance, anything, there's winners and losers and people that get more than they bargained for out of it, and there's people that get less than they're supposed to out of it. But yeah, that's one of
And
the
Alex,
yeah.
in short, when you or your spouse passes and they're not eligible children that benefit from
Yeah.
the
Social
social.
Security, that money stays with the state. It does not transfer or pass in any form or way.
Yeah, there's not like an accounted for lump sum that can go on to anybody. That's how pensions mostly work too. You know, it's like the pension system is there for the good of the whole group. And like if you live to 100, you got more benefit. If you live 6 years, you didn't get that much benefit, but it's kind of just a pooled risk thing. So yeah, yes, the much more concise version is husband, spouse, husband, wife, whatever. And that's pretty much who it covers. Unless there's minor kids like under 16 usually. So yeah, but I mean, I'll get you that handout or something viable on the estate planning part. Might just be a little checklist, but I'll get you that. And yeah, I mean, feel free at any time. I mean, I'm down here in Richmond. I don't know where you are, but if you ever want to come up with more questions, want to talk, anything like that, feel free to check with me.
Thank you, Alex.